What's up, guys? Welcome to this week's prediction video for UFC 319, Chimaev versus Du Plessis. Before we get into that, I want to talk about the best bets video that we cooked up last week. This is 2 weeks in a row now where the safety lock hit again, the ultimate lock hit again, the affordable juice lock hits again, the most confident picks parlay hit again, and unfortunate the easy workout and the underdog city didn't hit again, but the over 3.5 in the main event did hit as well, so that was pretty cool. And there's also two honorable mentions that I want to discuss from last week's picks. Just some of my highlights from last card. I'm legit about to start glazing myself here, so be prepared. First, I want to bring up this fight, the Uros Medic versus Gilbert Urbina fight. And I legit said that Gilbert Urbina, if he lands on Medic, it won't be enough to severely punish Medic because he doesn't have enough power. Because before this fight, Medic, he got knocked out by someone who actually has crazy finishing power. So I said if Gilbert lands, it won't be the same type of power. And I also said that Gilbert relies on his chin way too often. And he's comfortable getting hit. You know, coming up against a sniper like Medic, that's not going to end well. So Gilbert landed on Medic, which wasn't enough to take him out, like I said. And Gilbert gets hit too often, relying on his chin, which definitely costed him here. So calling Uros Medic to win by knockout, that hit. Next fight, I want to highlight the Julius Walker fight going down exactly the way I said it would. I knew it would be a war, and I knew Julius would win by decision. I said people think Julius is going to walk in and knock out Rafael Quinceañera, but Julius Walker, he's primarily a wrestler, and he's going to look to get this fight on the ground. And that made me believe that Rafael's striking is finally going to be showcased in this fight due to him not being rushed by punches by his opponents finally, you know? So because that's never been Julius Walker game plan. You know, he comes in and tries to take you down. He tries to wear you down. So we saw Rafael striking finally be showcased in the UFC. He defended some takedowns, landed some of his own shots, but calling the Julius Walker decision win, I just felt that was sharp. But okay, I'm done glazing myself. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you guys are having a great day. And let's dive into these picks. First up on the board, we have Idiris Alibi versus Joseph Morales. So this fight is actually the finale of season 33 of The Ultimate Fighter. And I believe it's going down at this event, UFC 319. So I thought I'd do some research on these guys and include it into this video. So I'm picking Idiris Alibi to win this fight. You know, so he's a undefeated fighter coming out of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan. And of course, we haven't seen him in the UFC level, but from what we have seen from this guy, he seems like he is serious, you know, just his demeanor in itself, you can tell that he means business. He is a very well-rounded. He has 4 knockouts, 4 decisions, and 2 submissions, and he isn't just a one-trick pony, you know, he's beating guys, of course they're not UFC level, but his last couple of opponents, they actually have decent records. It's not like 1-26 or 3-24 type of fighters, right? So he's doing what he's supposed to do, which is dominate his fights. If you want to be a contender in the UFC, or if you want the UFC to recognize you, you need to dominate your fights in the regional scene, and that's exactly what he's doing. You know, he's fighting Joseph Morales, who actually has fought in the UFC before. Back in 2017, he made his debut, only to get cut a year later. He's 1-2 in the UFC. He got cut, then won 3 straight victories in a row. And now he's being given another chance to fight here because he's in the final of this season's Ultimate Fighter finale. But in my opinion, he's a lamb to be slaughtered for this new prospect. This guy Joseph, he isn't the worst fighter. You know, his UFC run, it was a bit unlucky. You know, he got a first round submission win against a low caliber fighter. It was a good win, right? First round submission win. Then he gets his first loss ever in his pro career, getting TKO'd by Davison Figueiredo, and then loses a split decision to another low caliber fighter. And then he goes on to win 3 more in the regional scene, but those regional scene wins, they are to the absolute worst caliber of fighters you can find. So it wasn't really impressive at all, right? But we have Joseph Morales, so we have seen him in the UFC before, and we can tell that he isn't really UFC material. And on the other side, we have a new, well-rounded, dangerous prospect on the rise, and I can definitely see Idiris Alibi winning his UFC debut against someone who is just average all around. You know, that fight with Davison Figueiredo that Joseph Morales had in 2018, that was pure domination from Figueiredo. And of course, Figgy, he was the man back then, but Morales was getting controlled for the majority of the fight. Even in the second round, then he was getting controlled easily. Then he gets up, he eats a left hook, and then he gets finished. Then in his next fight after that, Joseph Morales fights Eric Shelton, who also was able to secure takedowns time and time again in that fight, resulting in him getting controlled for the majority of that fight. And Eric Shelton, he's been cut from the UFC for years. So I just think Alibi, he has a fast-paced and aggressive style. He mixes strikes with kicks very effectively. He has spinning attacks. He has takedown attempts as well. You know, he also secured a highlight reel flying knee knockout in the semifinals of this season's Ultimate Fighter, which showcases his striking is legit and he's very athletic as well. So this should be an easy night for him in my opinion. I see him dominating this fight everywhere he goes. He's undefeated, well-rounded, a dynamic striker, and he's dominant in the regional scene. Where you have Morales, he's just 1-2. His wins uh are to very weak competition, and he just has an average skill set. So I'm going with Alibi to outclass him everywhere, and he likely dominates this fight from start to finish. Moving on to the next fight, we're breaking down Karine Silva and Dione Barboza. So my pick for this fight is going to be Karine Silva. I believe this fight was supposed to be originally supposed to be Karine Silva versus JJ Aldrich, but JJ pulled out, and now Barboza steps in, giving her only 17 days to prepare for this fight, and that's not a lot of time. You know, this is actually a rematch. Karine Silva and Dione Barboza fought in 2019 in Brazil, and Dione Barboza won that fight by unanimous decision. But that was 6 years ago, and we can't really get too much out of that because it's been a long time since they rematched. But in regards to this fight specifically, let's look at Karine Silva's first three wins in the UFC. She wins them all by first round submission, just dominated those fights, right? Then fights Ariana Delipsky, and she controls her for the whole fight. And yeah, Ariana Delipsky, that's not hard to do, control her if you're a dominant wrestler, right? And then she fights a somewhat decent opponent in Viviane Araujo, and she couldn't finish her. She couldn't control her for too long. And then we see Karine Silva fade late in the third round. However, I want to mention, after she gassed in that fight, she made a comment about her performance, and she actually said she was prepared to go all three rounds, but she was on her period during that fight, and that is what affected her performance. So personally, I'm gonna take her word for it. We're gonna take her word for it. She gasped because she was on her period, and Karine was doing really well in the beginning of that fight, like how she usually does. And then we have to ask, can Karine Silva out wrestle Barboza or outwork her in the grappling? And I think so. I think she can do that. You know, Barboza is big and strong. She's bigger than Karine Silva. But we saw Miranda Maverick, who's even smaller than Karine Silva, land takedowns on Barboza. Plus, Barboza is coming in on short notice, and Karine Silva has been training. You know, she probably won't be on her period in this fight, so she won't gas late in the third round. And I can see this being a close fight, but the more prepared fighter should come through. And I can see Karine Silva coming in, putting some pressure on her with her strikes, grinding on her against the fence, getting some takedowns, outworking her for three rounds. And 17 days to prepare for Barboza just isn't enough, in my opinion. And Karine comes into fights with a finishing mindset, you know. Out of her 18 wins, 17 of them have come by finish. So I'm not sure she's going to get a finish here, but I can see her winning rounds pretty clearly, you know. She comes to dominate. She comes to finish. 17 out of 18 wins by finish, you know. She has a dangerous submission game. She has a full camp coming into this fight where you have Barboza only 17 days. She's big. She's going to be bigger than her, but I just feel she's less prepared. And I just think Karine Silva's pressure, her takedowns, and her control is going to allow her to win this fight by either a decision or a late finish. So moving on to our next fight, we got Bryan Battle versus Nursulton Ruziboev. My pick is Bryan Battle for this fight. This is a banger of a fight, you know. We got Bryan Battle. Basically, he's undefeated in the UFC. He had that one loss to Renat Fakhretdinov, but in that fight, Bryan Battle did take that fight on short notice. It was only 2 weeks to prepare, and he apparently had a rib injury as well coming into that fight. And he also said that he had a fever as well on fight week. So there was just so many things that were stacked against him in that fight, which is why we saw him get absolutely dominated so easily. And I think if they run it back, I do think that fight would be very different. But other than that, Bryan, he has looked really good. His striking is solid. His grappling is also coming along as well, and he's very durable. You know, he's never been knocked out. He has a great chin on him. He's fighting Nursulton Ruziboev, and he's really big for middleweight. He's standing at 6'5". He's going to have a 3-inch height advantage here, but Bryan Battle will actually have a 1-inch reach advantage on him. So Ruziboev, he's 4-1 in the UFC, and he also got dominated in his one loss that was to Joaquin Buckley, and that was pure domination from Buckley. He was landing nice shots on Ruziboev. He dropped him in that fight. He was getting takedowns over and over, and he outclassed him in every part of that fight. So when it comes to this matchup specifically, Bryan Battle and Ruziboev together, I think we're gonna see Ruziboev try to come out fast and aggressive. Out of his 36 wins, 25 of them have come in the first round. But when he realizes that he's fighting a guy that is durable or has high level striking as well, he tends to become more patient and play the long game. And Ruziboev, he has good grappling, he has good jiu-jitsu. 20 of his wins come from submission. Him and Battle, I would say, are pretty evenly matched. And you know, when we see Ruziboev's record, we can it can be intimidating by just seeing the 36 wins, right? But these guys that he these guys that he was beating before the UFC, they're exactly that. They're not UFC level. So in the striking, I believe Bryan Battle uh can have an edge. You know, I believe in Bryan Battle's chin. I don't think he gets knocked out in the first round or anything like that. He's never been knocked out or finished by strikes. And I think the striking will be competitive between the two. And if Bryan Battle is getting touched up, we've seen him eat shots and come back and throw his own, like in the Kevin Juice fight, where he just outdogged Kevin Juice and then TKO'd him. And in the grappling, we've seen Bryan's grappling come along. We saw him get controlled in the first round in the fight with Randy Brown. Then he adjusted, got the fight into the clinch, and he was landing knees and punches in the clinch. And we saw he did a good job adapting to what the fight presented. And Randy, he was a long and rangy fighter, just like Ruziboev. And Bryan Battle, he closed the distance and he got the fight where he was able to land more. Bryan showed grit and determination there, and he showed that he's willing to win by any means necessary. And I think Battle is going to be the more well-rounded fighter. In the striking, he throws sick head kicks. You know, he stays on the outside. I think he will be using a lot of kicks here and has nice counters. I think he's very durable. So when he does get touched up by the strikes, he will adjust and close the distance. And I can see him getting on the inside and initiate the clinch up against the fence again. You know, as the fight goes on, Bryan Battle will be the one who's looking better in the judges' eyes, because Ruziboev, his power is going to be diminishing as the fight goes on. So I think Ruziboev, he's going to have to get a quick knockout here, or it's going to be a long night for him. But he's going to be put into the clinch, being grinded on against the fence, and he's going to be getting hit with kicks and knees. And Bryan Battle, you know, he's a warrior. You know, he will outdog you, and I think he is too durable to get hit with a first round knockout here. And I think Ruziboev, he's going to have to stay on the outside and pick Bryan Battle apart for the rest of the fight. But we've seen that doesn't work. You know, Bryan Battle, he doesn't accept that. He will smother you against the fence if he has to and neutralize his opponent's power or his long rangy style of fighting. So I can see the first round being a bit of a scare for Battle. Maybe he gets hit with a good shot, but Battle will adjust and close the distance, get in the clinch, land his own shots, or get some takedowns, you know, because Ruziboev doesn't have the best takedown defense. So Battle is just a better, well-rounded fighter in my opinion, and he's durable, well-rounded, and I believe that he's going to adapt mid-fight. And coming up against a big, huge Ruziboev, you know, he's going to be dangerous early, but I think he will fade as the fight goes on. And I don't think his takedown defense is going to be good enough to hang with Bryan Battle. So I just think Battle is going to survive an early storm, grind him down into a clinch, and use his wrestling. Most likely win a decision win here. So that's it for that fight. Moving on to our next fight. In this bout, we got Edson Barboza versus Drakkar Klose. I'm picking Drakkar Klose to win this fight. We have a 39-year-old Edson Barboza versus a 37-year-old Klose. You know, Barboza, he's still shredded, he's still athletic, but I don't think he will win this fight. My gut is telling me Drakkar is winning this fight. You know, when Barboza fights, he wants a clean fight, you know, staying on the outside, picking you apart, having a nice striking battle with you. But when it comes to guys that come in trying to pressure him and make it ugly or a dirty fight, they can land something, then drop and then get into a takedown. He doesn't do well in those fights, you know. Guys who come in and pressure him with strikes, then go for takedowns or grinding up against the fence, he usually don't doesn't win those fights. And Drakkar Klose, man, he's a dangerous fighter. He just faced an absolute savage last fight. He got knocked out really badly. But that Joel Alvarez, he's just a different breed in the lightweight division. Close, he is a good fighter. He can pressure opponents with strikes and get takedowns on them. You know, he can land some nice ground and pound, and he even landed a takedown on Joel Alvarez in that last fight. So you have Edson Barboza, who has been very inconsistent in his career. You know, winning some, losing some, and the guys he has lost to, some of them are not even that high level, you know. Drakkar has only lost to Joel Alvarez and Beneil Dariush. Beneil Dariush, those guys are good, right? And I think Drakkar has a style that can cause Barboza some trouble in this fight. And I can see Drakkar being more cautious coming into this fight, coming off of a knockout loss. He'll be defensive, won't get hit with anything too big, and he'll want to land some takedowns on Barboza. And I think he can mix in the strikes, then control him on the fence or on the ground. So I think Barboza, he might land something early in the fight when things are slow and calm. Maybe a big thudding leg kick to the body or something like that. But that's when Drakkar makes it ugly, closes the distance, and doesn't accept the fight where he's just standing on the outside the whole night, getting picked apart. I think he will land some takedowns, and I think uh we're at a point in Barboza's career where we know the blueprint to beat him. And I think Drakkar is at a level high enough in order to execute that game plan. So, yes, Barboza is an elite kickboxer, but when it comes to pressure and wrestling, he tends to struggle. And I think Drakkar, he can pressure well, and he's going to mix in strikes and takedowns, and he's only lost to really elite fighters, you know? So, the pick is Drakkar Klose. I think he's going to make it ugly. He gets in the clinch and he's going to outwork Barboza. Moving on to our next fight, we got Chase the Gooner Hooper versus Alexander Hernandez. My pick is Chase Hooper. So both of these guys, you know, they've been beating on old men. So finally, they're both fighting someone who isn't an elderly. You know, we got 32 years of age for Alexander Hernandez and 25 years old for Chase Hooper. And I just think Hooper is the much better fighter everywhere. He's going to be 5 inches taller here, you know, 2 inch reach advantage, and I think he will capitalize on that. I think the striking will favor Hooper. The clinch, the wrestling, I'm leaning with Hooper to be better in that area as well, of course. And Hernandez might have some moments where he blitzes Hooper, maybe lands a nice shot, maybe a good combination, but I think Hooper, he has some slick takedowns that can catch you off guard. You know, he's finally growing into his body, becoming a stronger version of himself. And Chase Hooper, he did take some losses early in his UFC run. Last time he lost, he was 22 years old, and ever since then, he's put up a 5 fight win streak, really coming into his stride. And you take a look at Hernandez's resume, he has some bad losses on there. Lost to Damon Jackson by split decision, lost to Bill Algeo by unanimous decision, got finished by Billy Quarantillo, got finished in the fight before that one by someone named Renato Cariniero. I don't know that guy. He lost to Thiago Moises, Drew Dober by knockout, I believe, and Donald Cerrone knocked him out as well. Like, a lot of these guys are not high level fighters, and I just think there's so much potential for Chase Hooper to be a high level fighter in the UFC. The way that he's improving from fight to fight, it's impressive. He has high fight IQ. It's impressive, and I can see him being a top contender, especially as he keeps growing. He's only 25 years old, and I think someone like Alexander Hernandez doesn't have the same high of a ceiling as Hooper, and he hasn't been as consistent in his career, where Chase Hooper is improving every time we see him. So, when it comes to the stylistic matchup, if Chase Hooper gets this fight on the ground, I think he'll be in cruise control the whole way through. That round is his grappling and his submissions. It's really elite. If we saw Damon Jackson take down Alexander Hernandez and kind of control him there for a good part of that fight. So if he can do that, I'm sure Chase Hooper can do the same thing here. And Chase Hooper, I think he has the cardio to continue pursuing takedowns, and eventually he could find the submission here. Where Hernandez, he's gonna want to keep this fight standing. He's gonna want to land big, powerful shots on the feet, put pressure on Hooper with his strikes. He's gonna want to defend takedowns, but I think Hooper can slow the pace down to his fight, and he can fight on his own pace, like how he usually does. Not get lured into a brawl or anything like that. He's gonna maintain his range, control the distance, and Hooper can land from the outside and win the fight in the clinch as well. So maybe Hernandez can defend takedown attempts, but even then, I think Hooper can land some nice shots on the feet. They won't be as powerful as Hernandez. I think the power uh, does go to Hernandez in this fight, but I do think Hooper can outvolume him if the takedowns don't work out in his favor, because we've seen his striking develop as well. So, and Hooper is a lot bigger. He's improving rapidly, and his grappling is just very slick, right? And then you have Hernandez, who very is inconsistent. He struggles versus volume and grappling. So the pick is Chase Hooper. I think he's gonna control the pace, win striking and the clinch, and just super dangerous on the mat. Next fight on the card, we have Jessica Andrade versus Lupita Godinez. I'm picking Lupita Godinez to win this fight. Jessica Andrade, I feel she has become so predictable. Like, she has so many losses in the UFC already, but if you look at them, they are to they're all like pretty high caliber fighters, that they understand how to beat her. They understand to avoid the big overhand right, and then you win, right? But yeah, everyone she's lost to, they really are like high level fighters. And her most recent loss to Jasmine Jastovicius, uh, that's a very high level fighter. Before that, it was Natalia Silva, then Tatiana Suarez, Erin Blanchfield, like top level fighters, right? But that just means that she can't compete with those high level fighters. Like, who has she beaten really that stands out other than that slam knockout on Rose Namajunas? She's just become way too predictable in her fights. And I think Lupita has better boxing than her. Her wrestling is going to be better. I think she's much more durable. She's never been finished. She's never been knocked out or submitted. And I think she's more creative and fluid in her overall game. And I think she can match the same type of aggression that Jessica brings to the table, but in a more calculated and measured way. And she's not as reckless as Jessica. I just think Lu- Lupita, she's at a high enough level where she can understand how to beat someone like Jessica and then execute that game plan. I think what Jessica brings to the fight won't be enough for someone like Lupita, who has seen that style before and she knows how to deal with it. So yeah, I just think Andrade, she's too predictable. Her she's gonna be looking for that overhand right, and she hasn't been looking good recently, where you have Lupita who, never been finished, very durable, has better boxing and wrestling in my opinion, and I think she has a more composed aggression, She can match the aggressiveness, but in a more composed way, right? So the pick is Lupita Godinez. I think she's gonna neutralize Andrade's power with clean boxing and wrestling. She's gonna mix it up in this fight. So moving on to our next fight, we got Gerald Meerschaert. I never really versus Michael Oleg. Those are the names we're going with. My pick for this fight, I'm picking Michael Oleg. I'm picking Michael Oleg to win this fight. So on the feet, I do think Michael will be the superior striker, and on the ground, I do think Gerald will be the superior wrestler slash jiu-jitsu artist. But the fight starts out on the feet, so immediately there's an advantage for Michael in this fight. And I feel like Gerald Meerschaert. Let's just go with Gerald. He is one of those guys where I feel like this might sound mean, but he can dedicate his whole life to boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing, and I just don't think he'll ever be good at striking. Like it's just not for him. His his timing is just so bad. Uh, he's 37 years of age, and it still has looked the same. There's no improvements at all. His striking technique, I just don't think it's UFC level, and I feel like his stand-up game is not where it needs to be, and we'll never see a version of him where his striking is decent. But we have to keep in mind Michael Oleg, he gets submitted in the UFC often. 5 out of his 7 UFC losses are by being submitted, which is a major red flag if you're backing Michael Oleg to win this fight. Still, though, I think he will be more agile than GM3. I think he will move around the cage better. I think he can defend takedowns. And let's keep in mind, GM3, he's 37 years old and Michael is 30. So I think Michael will definitely look a lot more athletic here. I feel like they both fight according to their age. Like GM3 does fight like an aging fighter. And based off of Michael's most recent performance, maybe you can say he looks like he's finally starting to get into his prime, right? He had a great early knockout victory against someone who isn't a high level fighter, and GM3 is going to bring a ton of experience into this matchup, but I still feel like Michael will be the more athletic and agile one. I think he can avoid the takedowns and keep this fight on the feet. He'll land more convincing shots in the judge's eyes, even if he doesn't knock out GM3. But there might even be a knockout here because GM3 has been knocked out multiple times before. I know he's been knocked out before. So GM3, he's one of those guys where you know exactly what it is he wants, so you know exactly how to avoid it. So he isn't an overall good fighter. He's a good submission artist, and I think Michael knows that, and he will land the better shots and stay out of trouble. Plus, Michael looked great in his last fight. I don't think it'll be uh, a knockout here because GM3 does have that experience and he can make it long, but I wouldn't be surprised if Michael knocks him out late. But I do think it'll probably be a decision win. Gerald Meerschaert, he does have an elite sub game, but he has poor striking and he's aging, right? He's definitely out of his prime. And I just think Michael's going to be the faster, stronger striker. But he does have bad takedown defense or submission defense. So I'm going to bank on Michael to avoid the submissions, win the fight by keeping it standing, and he'll probably possibly get a late knockout in this fight. Moving on to our next fight, we got Bobby, Bobby King Green versus Diego Ferreira. Picking Diego Ferreira to win this fight. I'm picking Diego Ferreira to win this fight. So when you take a look at who Diego Ferreira has lost to, it's only to high level fighters, like Grant Dawson, Mateus Gamrot, Beneil Dariush, Dustin Poirier, guys at the top of the division. And anyone who isn't making a case to be at the top of the division, Diego takes care of these guys, you know, and Bobby Green is definitely someone who isn't making a run for the title or anything like that. He never was that guy, and he probably will never be that guy. You know, this is the type of opponent that Diego thrives on. So, yeah, Bobby Green, who has some losses on his record that don't look too good. They haven't aged nicely, you know, like Thiago Moises, Francisco Trinaldo, lost to Drew Dober by knockout, and yeah, he does have that win over Grant Dawson where he knocked him out with a jab, but in my opinion, that was just a really weird a sequence of events where he dropped Dawson with a light jab, it looked like, while he was coming in. Then instantly Dawson couldn't recover. He just shelled up. And if they run that fight back, I feel like Grant Dawson wins 9 out of 10 times. And that was just the one time where he wouldn't win. So other than that, Grant, he doesn't have any really notable wins. He beat an aging Tony Ferguson, but everyone did that to Tony, right? So I was gonna say initially that this is a grappler versus striker matchup because Diego is gonna be looking to control Bobby Green on the fence, and Green is gonna want to do what he usually does, you know, keep his hands low, walk you down, use some of that slick head movement, but Diego Ferreira can strike as well. You know, if you go back and watch that knockout he had over Michael Johnson, one of the cleanest overhand right knockouts you have ever seen in the UFC or ever, right? So Diego, he does have power. He can time his shots and land as well. So that makes me think he just has much more tools to win this fight than way more than Bobby Green, you know, who has that kind of the street fighter type of style, you know. So I can see Diego throwing some hard shots on the feet to back up Bobby Green, then instantly swooping in and mixing in the takedowns. And I don't think Diego is just going to stand there on the outside the whole fight and let Bobby Green pick him apart without going in and shooting for a takedown or throwing some nasty overhand uh, to close the distance. So I think we'll see more activity, more tools, and more of a well-rounded game from Diego in this one. And 38, 40 years old, you know, they're this is a pretty evenly matched. But even if Bobby Green was like a lot younger, this is like the year of the unks where these older fighters they're really putting it on these younger fighters. But pretty evenly matched, I would say, in terms of age and experience. But the pick is Diego Ferreira. I think he's well rounded. He has a dangerous overhand right hand shot, and he has very strong wrestling as well. Whereas Green, he tends to look flashy. He has that flashy boxing style, but he's very inconsistent, and his resume looks very weak. Where the pick has to be Diego Ferreira. I just think he's going to pressure Bobby Green back, you know, mix in wrestling and strikes, and he's gonna win this fight in a clear way. You know, it's gonna be a clearly Diego Ferreira win. I don't see a robbery or anything like that. So yeah, moving on to our next fight. Man, I don't know how I feel about this fight right here. Before I give my pick, I just want to explain. Like, let me explain before. Like, I don't want anyone getting mad at this pick. Like, just chill. Chill. I'm going with Tim Elliott to win this fight. Okay. Let me explain why. Let me explain why. So, we have seen Kai Asakura in the UFC. You know, he lost to the champion who he came from another organization and immediately gets a title shot, which was one of the weirdest things that the UFC has ever done. You know, just immediately giving someone from another organization a title shot. He gets dominated by the champion, and now he's fighting number 11 ranked Tim Elliott. Immediately, when I saw this matchup, I was like, oh, okay, Tim Elliott, he's a below average UFC fighter, nothing special. 38 years old versus 31 years old. He's a 31-year-old newcomer from Japan who has some hype behind him because he just got an immediate title shot, lost to the champion, no shame in that. Kai should run through this below average UFC fighter because he has hype and Tim Elliott is washed, right? But before I instantly said, okay, Kai Shikora is going to win because Tim Elliott is below average, Tim Elliott is still a UFC fighter, a ranked UFC fighter. And I just think the UFC is a different ball game than these other organizations. So now in this matchup, we're finally going to get a good grasp of what Kai Asakura is actually about. Does he actually belong in the UFC? Because he got dominated by the champion, but we can't really tell if he's UFC level or not because he hasn't fought any other fighters. He fought Manel Kopp early in his career, but he got TKO'd. But that's still a very high caliber fighter who has potential to be a champion. But when he matches up with Tim Elliott, we're gonna see Kai Sakura doing his thing. He's gonna be trying to strike him, putting the pressure on him, throwing these athletic flying knees. He has a great kicking game as well. Puts up volume with his leg kicks. Excuse me. And then he has high leg kicks as well. So, and he actually has some good takedown defense, and he can scramble out of bad positions. Of course, not versus the champion, who he's just a different breed. But in his other fights, he scrambles pretty nicely, and he has some good power in his strikes. He has good accuracy. But with Tim Elliott, he's a wrestler first, so he's gonna want to replicate what Pantoja did to him, what Pantoja did to Kai Sakura. And Tim Elliott has a really awkward style. He moves to his own rhythm. He can be very slow, then get fast out of nowhere. He started out his last fight doing a cartwheel, trying to hit his opponent at the same time, then immediately goes in, transitions into a roundhouse kick. He uses his head movement well. He has good footwork, doesn't stay at one place for too long for you to hit him. And he has a style that can really give Kai Sakura some trouble. Um, any opportunity he gets to take you down, like if you throw a kick at Tim Elliott, he's immediately catching it and going in for a takedown, and he's dragging you to the ground. And when he gets you to the ground, he's in his element. He's transitioning positions very smoothly. He maintains top control. He looks for submissions. Like, he's good. Like, he's really good on the ground. And I think styles make fights, and I think Tim Elliott can actually get this done. I think he has a style that can trouble Asakura. Like, Tim Elliott, he's never been dropped or knocked out in the UFC. He's very durable. And if Kai Sakura wins, he's going to need to knock him out early because the longer the fight goes, the more it favors Tim Elliott. Tim Elliott's going to be wearing on him, dancing around the cage, landing takedowns, and no one has ever been able to knock out Tim Elliott or even drop him. Like I said, he's very durable, and I mean, Tim Elliott is the only person to beat Tagir Ulanbekov in the UFC. And yeah, it was a fight where he kind of cheated in, but he won that fight by unanimous decision, and that's very impressive in itself. And now he has to fight some random from Japan, this random Japanese dude who's never fought in the UFC. Like, realistically, this should be a walk in the park for him. Okay, not a walk in the park, I'm exaggerating, but I do think he has a realistic path to victory here. And when their styles match up, Tim Elliott, he has been doing this in the UFC level. And this is the year of Unks, like I said before in the last fight. This is the year of Unks. All these older fighters, they're getting the job done. We can't count them out just because of their age anymore. So I just think, yes, Asakura, he's very athletic. He has good takedown defense. He scrambles well. He has dangerous kicks and knees up the middle. But Elliott has an awkward style. He has elite scrambles. He has relentless wrestling. He's very durable. So I just think Tim Elliott can out grapple Kai Sakura in this fight. The wrestling is gonna definitely be on Tim Elliott's side, and I think he can frustrate Kai Sakura with his awkward style, and he could win the later rounds for sure. It might be a little, it might be a scare for him in the beginning fight, but once Tim Elliott gets into his groove, I think he can land some takedowns and win this fight. But this is the fight where we're gonna see if Kai Sakura actually does belong at the UFC level. Because Tim Elliott's been doing this for a long time. But yeah, pick is gonna be Tim Elliott. Moving on to Michael Venom Page versus Jared Cannonier. My pick is Michael Venom Page, and I say that confidently. This is one of those fights that I'm very confident in. Michael Venom Page, he's one of these strikers that knows how to enter a flow state. It's like as soon as the bell rings to start the round, he's already in that flow state. He moves on his own timing. He strikes you whenever he wants. He plays these mental games with you, so you think you know what he's gonna do, then he's just striking you again out of nowhere. And we saw Ian Gary, he couldn't strike with him, and he and Gary had to wrestle in order to win that fight. And we saw Shara Bullet get pieced up in a fight where I indeed did say that MVP was going to run through Shara Bullet when he was a massive two to three two to three 2-1 underdog, 3-1 underdog, something like that, because I just think there's levels to striking, and you can tell, just by looking at MVP and the way he strikes, he knows how to enter an elite striking flow state. So I knew MVP would win that fight with Chara Bullet, and I thought he could beat Ian Gary, but Ian Gary did turn into a wrestler there. So he's good at staying at the outside, picking you apart, hands low, has amazing footwork, literally strikes you like a cobra out of nowhere, and it's bad intention when he lands, he lands with power as well, and just super unpredictable. He knows how to feint, he knows how to fake a punch, then throw a flying knee. I'm a huge MVP fan, and it's for a good reason. His striking is just beautiful to watch, and I think it's better than anyone striking in the division right now. But when it comes to mixing in all the martial arts, the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu, all of that, maybe he's not the best at that, but in purely striking, MVP, I believe he can outclass pretty much anyone in the division, in my opinion. So I do think it will be this fight specifically will be a stand-up fight for the most part, and that's going to heavily favor MVP. You know, MVP, he did mention that he 100% expects Jared Cannonier to start taking him down in the fight because that would be the smart thing to do. But Jared, for the most part, he's a striker. He's a good striker. He likes to be patient at times. He gets a feel on you so he can time his shots, and he has crazy power when he does land. So he knows how to apply pressure, walk you down, then throw when you least expect it. Kind of like MVP, but not as smooth, right? So this is going to be a fun striking fight in my opinion, but I think MVP has him beat. His footwork will be better, his timing will be better. He will be more accurate than him, and I think MVP will have the speed advantage here as well. So he'll just be faster than Jared. And I think Jared, he's going to be in for a long night. MVP thrives in a striking fight, and if you give that to him, you're going to lose the fight, right? So I think Jared is going to look to walk him down, but I think he's going to realize that's not a good game plan, and he'll have to resort to the wrestling. But I feel MVP will be landing enough shots on Jared throughout the fight that even if Jared gets him down, it won't be enough to have won him that round, because MVP, he'll be landing the more devastating shots on the feet on Jared Cannonier throughout the fight, enough so that he wins the rounds. So even if he does get taken down, it won't win him the fight, because in the time it took him to get him on the ground, Michael Venom Page would have already landed some devastating shots, or some very convincing shots in the judge's eyes. So I just think MVP, he has elite footwork, elite timing, and he has very unpredictable striking. Where in Cannonier, he's very powerful, but I think he's slower, and he's gonna want to wrestle here when he's losing the striking. And I don't think the wrestling is gonna be enough to win him those rounds. So I just think MVP is gonna outstrike him and then style on him at range. So going on to our next fight, we got Geoff Neal versus Carlos Prates. My pick is Carlos Prates to win this fight. And again, this is a fun striking matchup where I think superior striker will prevail in this matchup. Carlos Prates, he can enter a really nice flow state when you decide to strike with him. And both of these guys, they're both coming off of a loss to Ian Gary. In the Geoff Neal fight, Gary, he did a good job using his footwork and outstriking Neal. Gary, he was controlling the range, moved away from Neal's power very well. And in the Prates fight, Gary did well using his movement, but we saw more takedown attempts in that fight, trying to take Prates down more often, which shows Gary thought there was higher level threat on the feet with Prates, right? So I think Geoff Neal isn't going to fight Carlos Prates the way Ian Gary did. I don't think Geoff Neal is going to mix in the wrestling as often. And if he does, it won't be as effective as how Gary did it, as smoothly as Gary did it. And I think he will be trying to walk down Prates, put some pressure on him. But that's exactly what Prates wants. You know, he wants you to be lured into a striking match so he can enter his flow state. And I think Prates, he's a more diverse striker who has more in his toolbox, like knees, elbows, different types of kicks, and is more elusive with his strikes. You know, he has Muay Thai tatted on his chest. Where you have Geoff Neal, who is more like a meat and potatoes when it comes to boxing, like the traditional in and out, 1-2, out, 1-2 hook. And I feel like Prates thrives against those types of fighters. So I think they both have a tremendous amount of power in their shots, but I'm going to give Prates the edge here just because of how accurate he is when he lands. And when he does land, it's such a stinging shot. Like it's like he's zapping you. But even without the knockout power, Prates doesn't need a finish here to he doesn't need to finish Geoff Neal to win this fight, and I think he can purely outstrike him. His timing is excellent, and he's patient enough to find the perfect shot. And I can see him waiting for Geoff Neal to overcommit, then punishing him with a sharp, accurate counter shot. And I can see that happening over and over again in the fight. Then we can see Prates gaining some momentum and finding his rhythm and start picking up the pace. You know, I don't think Geoff Neal he's going to do enough to disrupt Carlos Prates' rhythm, and I think he is going to stand with him for too long to the point where he is going to let Carlos find his groove. And by the time that Geoff Neal wants to do something about it, like shoot for a takedown, it's already become too predictable. And Carlos can see it coming, move back, then continue to style on Geoff Neal. And I think Carlos' movement, you know, it's very good against a fighter like Geoff Neal. And he's going to be patient, let Neal walk him down, let Neal get comfortable, then strike him out of nowhere. And I can see Neal eating some nice counter shots throughout the fight, maybe even getting dropped a few times, but I don't know if we'll see a knockout here. It is very possible that we see a knockout. You know, Carlos Prates, he's very accurate when he lands, so maybe we can see Geoff Neal get dropped a couple times. But, you know, Neal, he's very powerful, but I just think his boxing is very basic. He has a very basic style. And Prates, he's more diverse in his strikes. You know, he's patient. He has very accurate counter shots. And I just think Carlos Prates will pick Geoff Neal apart for the majority of this fight. And he's going to win the striking battle in a match that is going to be striking. The majority of the match will be striking, right? So moving on to our next matchup, we're going to be breaking down and talking about Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico. I'm going Lerone Murphy to win this fight. I'm going Lerone Murphy, the undefeated Lerone Murphy, who's 8-0 in the UFC, fighting a UFC debut. And we have Lerone Murphy. I saw that he was an underdog, and that doesn't really make much sense to me. You know, I just think the UFC is a whole different ball game, and Lerone has proved he can be a top contender in this division. He can consistently get wins and perform at a high level in this promotion. He can consistently adapt to fight style and overcome it. You know what I mean? And he's fighting Aaron Pico, who hasn't done that in the UFC level. He has looked good outside the UFC, that's for sure. He's very athletic. He has great boxing. He has great wrestling. He has a great fight IQ. He does a great job at transitioning the wrestling to the boxing, you know, as well. He's very capable of both worlds. But Lerone Murphy has excellent striking, excellent footwork, and he has the cardio to go the distance. You know, he has very elusive power in his shots, and he's very good and consistent more than anything, you know. I think Murphy can stay on the outside for most of this fight, land some nice kicks, move around, outstrike Pico, and Lerone won't let him get too comfortable in the wrestling. You know, I think Lerone is athletic enough to sprawl and defend takedowns and land the heavier shots on the feet, keep moving and using his footwork to discomfort Pico. And Aaron Pico, he likes to be aggressive with his strikes sometimes, and that's not a problem at all for Murphy. he has handled that pressure well many times in his career. You know, he's very durable, never been finished, undefeated, obviously. And his last three wins are to Josh Emmett, Dan Ige, and Edson Barboza. I think that's an impressive three-fight victory, whereas the guys that Aaron Pico is beating isn't as high level or impressive to have on your resume, you know? And I think Pico's aggressive style in his boxing, it can cost him against someone like Murphy, who can counter those shots and exploit those potential openings in the striking exchanges, right? And I just think he can weather a storm and drag this fight into the later rounds. And as the fight goes on, the it will fa- as the fight goes on, the more it favors Leron Murphy, right? In my opinion. So he's proven he can go the distance and look good up until the final bell. So Pico, he is gonna look to get this fight on the ground, I believe, and I understand he's training with guys like Chimaev and Arman Tsarukyan, but just because you're training with them doesn't mean you're going to adapt their skill set into yours, right? Just look at their record differences. You know, Arman Tsarukyan is 22-3, and Chimaev undefeated 14-0, and Aaron Pico has 6 losses before the UFC. And sure, some were when he was still super young, but I don't think it's going to be easy to control Murphy and keep him on the ground for the majority of the fight. You know, when Leron Murphy fought Makwan Amir Khani, he did get held down for a whole first round, but then Murphy came out in the second round determined not to get taken down. And he adapted really well, looked super locked in, timed the perfect knee as Makwan came in for a takedown and knocked him out cold, right? So we've seen guys take down Murphy, but he always manages to adapt to the fight or get back up to his feet and then win the fight, you know? So, and in the striking, Pico is going to look to pressure Murphy, but again, I just think Murphy's footwork and counter shots, they'll be too good for Pico. And the level of competition isn't even close. So I just think, you know, Murphy's undefeated still in the UFC, 8 wins already. He has elite footwork, proven versus top 10 competition in the UFC. Versus Aaron Pico, I just realized Aaron Pico's information is like slightly to the right. Anyways, Aaron Pico, he's very athletic. He has good wrestling and boxing, but I just think he's untested in the UFC, and I just think Leron Murphy has the ability to defend those takedowns and then land the cleaner shots throughout the fight. Moving on, we are here at the main event. We got Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev. I'm going Khamzat Chimaev to win this fight. I'm taking Chimaev mostly for the fact that I think he will land the takedowns. And I think if Chimaev takes you down, you're entirely in his realm. But not only that, you know, we did see Robert Whittaker take down Dricus, and we saw what Chimaev did to Robert Whittaker. You know, Chimaev ran through Robert, and if Robert can take Dricus down, I'm sure Chimaev can time an entry as well. And I want to talk about the fight with Chimaev and Kamaru Usman. Talking about that fight, he took Usman 4 downs in that fight, which is very impressive. But in the first round, Chimaev said that he broke his hand in that first round in that fight, and he still managed to continue landing takedowns. Of course, his power and his striking wasn't fully there, but he managed to land takedowns on Usman, which is still very impressive. And you know, people talk about Dricus and how he can be a bit goofy or reckless in his striking. And I think someone like Chimaev can match that energy. You know, if this gets into a brawl, I can see Chimaev being more of a dog as well and pressuring Dricus with his power shots and landing some devastating shots. But I don't think Chimaev is going to come into the first round and start emptying his gas tank as well, you know. And we've heard that he's working a ton on his cardio for this fight, and I think he still will be very calculated in this fight. You know, throw some nice overhands, swoop in for a takedown. I can see a potential ground and pound finish in this fight, but the thing is though, if Chimaev starts quick, like how he usually does, and doesn't get the finish in the first round. This is a 5 round fight, and there's a chance we can see him gas. I still think there's potential for Chimaev to finish the fight early. However, if it does go into the later rounds, I still feel Chimaev can hang in there, throwing powerful shots, continuing with the pressure, using his strikes, and still going for takedowns. Like Chimaev, he's not a quitter, and he may slow down, but he'll always be throwing down. And if this fight does start getting into the later rounds, I think Dricus would have had to weather such a heavy storm to the point where he would be compromised for the rest of the fight, and we can even see Dricus slowing down as well into the later rounds. And I think that Dricus does have a weird, unpredictable striking, but I think Chimaev has a bit of that in himself as well. So I think he can control where the fight goes by using his pressure in the wrestling whenever he wants. So Dricus is going to constantly have to defend takedowns, just relentless takedowns, deal with the overhand right of Chimaev. And I think the pressure of everything that Chimaev is coming at him with, it's just going to overwhelm Dricus in this matchup. I just think Chimaev, he's a different breed. His wrestling pressure is on a different level. His belief in himself is on a different level. And I think this is going to be a dogfight, but I just think Chimaev has more of a dog in him and will fight through anything that Dricus has to offer. So I'm going with the relentlessness of Chimaev in his wrestling. I think the power is going to be on his side as well, and I think mentally he's just unbreakable. He has such strong belief in himself. Where you have Dricus, who has unorthodox striking. He's very durable. He's aggressive. Uh, he likes to talk trash, but I don't think that's going to work against Chimaev. He's just mentally way too strong. So I'm picking Chimaev to win using his takedowns, and he's going to pressure and overwhelm Dricus throughout the fight. And I just think he's going to come out and then instantly compromise Dricus to the point where Dricus is going to not be the same fighter that he was in the start of round one for the start of round two, three, four. And we can possibly see both of them slowing down, but I think none of these guys are quitters. So I'm going with the relentlessness and pressure of wrestling, constant relentless pressure wrestling of Khamzat to win this fight. And that's just what I think. But looking at this fight from a bird's eye view, this is one of those fights that I feel they don't come around very often. This is one of those fights that we have to appreciate is actually happening. This is one of those immovable object versus unstoppable force type of fight. This is what main events are all about. And this is one of my most anticipated fights of the year. Both of these guys are very capable of winning and being champion. I'm just slightly leaning towards Khamzat for the reasons I just discussed. But this will be a good fight, and I'm very excited for it. That concludes my picks for this week's UFC fight card. Let me know what you guys thought. Let me know who you're rolling with, and drop your predictions down below. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my picks, or if you thought they were completely terrible. I'd love to see what y'all thought. As always, I hope you're doing well. I hope you have a great day. That's it for me. I'm out. Peace.